She did it right in front of the cake. 3 drops, clear, odorless, slipped from the glass vial into the champagne flute like they belonged there. Her back was angled toward the crowd. Her body blocked the view. Her smile did the rest. No one saw. Not the server polishing silverware just 10 feet away. Not the guests snapping pictures near the floral arch. And certainly not me, across the room, straightening my dress, trying to convince myself I still belonged in it. Elaine turned slowly, champagne flute in hand, like a queen presenting an offering. Her expression was warm, too warm. The kind of warmth you only feel right before a wildfire hits. "This one's for you, sweetheart," she said. She placed the glass in my hand like it was a gift. Something earned, something rare. I smiled back. A real one this time. I was trying. I wanted to be good tonight. No fights, no tension. It was her and Frank's 35th wedding anniversary. A full room of friends, co-workers, grandkids, a rented hall dressed in gold and blush, monogrammed napkins, crystal place cards. The kind of night she'd planned for decades. I lifted the glass and hesitated just a second too long. "Go on," she said sweetly. "Let's toast to strong women and quiet loyalty." My throat tightened, but I drank. Not all of it, but enough. The champagne was colder than I expected. A little bitter, maybe too bitter. But I smiled again, wider this time, and nodded politely like I was part of the celebration. Like I was welcome here. Elaine turned to clink glasses with the table beside us. My hand trembled. I blamed the alcohol. I hadn't eaten much. I always got a little shaky when I drank on an empty stomach. But even as I told myself that, something about the back of my neck prickled. Still, I sat up straighter, folded my napkin, and laughed at a joke I didn't hear. Across the room, Frank caught my eye. Just for a second. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He raised his glass. I raised mine. A silent nod passed between us. Something unsaid. I looked away. Elaine returned her focus to me, her gaze a little too eager now. Her eyes flicked down to the nearly empty glass in my hand, then back to my face. She was waiting. I shifted in my seat. A single bead of sweat slid down my back. She leaned closer, voice soft, sugar sweet. "You holding up okay, dear?" I nodded. She kept staring. I could feel it then, this weightless pause in the air like the moment before a curtain drops. And then, nothing, no dizziness, no nausea. Just a shallow breath and a steady beat in my chest. Elaine blinked, her lips twitched, her fingers gripped her own glass a little tighter. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to, because whatever she was expecting, it wasn't this. And what I drank that night wasn't just champagne, it was her plan. And somehow I was still here. There was a time, maybe 5 years ago, when I thought things could change between us. It was spring, and Elaine had just come out of gallbladder surgery. Frank was exhausted, running back and forth to the hospital, and Nathan was tied up in meetings, still proving himself at the firm. So I went. Every day. I brought her meals she wouldn't eat and fluffed pillows she never thanked me for. I sat by her bedside while she watched TV at full volume and pretended I wasn't there. And then, one day, I walked in to find her struggling to reach her slippers from the hospital bed. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. For a second, she looked small. I helped her sit up and slipped the slippers onto her feet. She looked at me. Not through me. At me. And she said, "I suppose you're useful for something." I clung to that like it was affection, like it meant she was warming up. Nathan thought I was imagining things. "She's just not demonstrative," he'd say. "That's just Mom." But that was the problem. I was always the one adjusting, explaining, excusing. When we got married, I genuinely believed she'd come around. I had grown up watching my mother host Thanksgivings with extra chairs for neighbors, pouring coffee for anyone who needed a moment of warmth. I thought being part of a new family meant creating space, not fighting for scraps of it. But Elaine guarded her territory like a wolf. She cooked every meal for every holiday, then criticized how I carved the turkey. She corrected my posture in family photos. She once rewrote the RSVP email to our wedding because she didn't like how I'd phrased "please arrive by 3 p.m. Little things you'd think, but they pile up, especially when you never fight back. I used to think silence was strength, that if I stayed kind, if I kept showing up, she'd see I wasn't a threat. But with Elaine, kindness was weakness. I remember one Christmas, I made a chocolate silk pie from scratch, Nathan's favorite. I brought it to the table with shaking hands, proud and nervous, hoping maybe that year would be different. Elaine took one bite, then called across the room, "Frank, did you order that frozen one again?" Frank didn't correct her. Nathan didn't either. I swallowed the lump in my throat and served everyone seconds. That's how it went. Every dinner, every holiday, every milestone. When Nathan and I bought our first home, she walked in, took one look at the open concept kitchen and said, "Ha, you really are okay with not having doors." When I got promoted, finally, after years of working weekends and skipping vacations, she congratulated me with, "Well, now who's gonna cook dinner for Nathan?" It was constant, subtle, but calculated, and yet, I stayed. I stayed because Nathan loved her, because Frank was kind, because I believed in earning my place, not demanding it. When Frank had his first stroke, I was the one who found him. Elaine was at her garden club. Nathan was at a conference. I rode in the ambulance, held Frank's hand, translated medical terms and signed papers. For 6 weeks, I cooked his low-sodium meals and helped him do his physical therapy. Elaine fluttered in when the nurses were around and vanished the moment she wasn't being watched. The house was too quiet. The days were too long. But Frank and I, we talked. For the first time, really. He told me about his early years with Elaine, how fiercely she'd fought for what she wanted, even if it meant bending the truth or people. He said she loved hard, but it was a love with teeth. "She's not a bad woman," he said once, voice low, "but she's never believed in sharing." That stuck with me. Because I realized then, Elaine didn't just dislike me. She saw me as something to manage, a threat to control. And the more I tried to prove I wasn't one, the more invisible I became. Then came the estate. After Frank's recovery, he and Elaine began making plans, reorganizing finances, updating documents, things retired couples do. I wasn't involved, of course not. But I caught snippets, heard Nathan mention power of attorney, heard Elaine say once, "We'll make sure everything stays in the family." I didn't think much of it, until the whispering started. Elaine began pulling Nathan aside, closing doors, talking to lawyers when I wasn't home. Her tone changed around me, smiles thinner, politeness brittle. There were more accidental slights, less effort to hide her disdain. And one morning, after she dropped by unannounced, I found a folder in our kitchen trash. It was mostly shredded, but I pieced together enough to recognize a title: Transfer of Ownership Agreement. Nathan's name, her signature, not mine. I didn't confront her, not yet, because something inside me had shifted. The girl who thought silence was strength was done being quiet, so I started keeping track of every voicemail, every document, every visit. And the day she called from a burner number, pretending to be a friend of a holistic supplier, asking about a certain sedative known to cause fainting without leaving a trace, I was recording. Not because I planned to use it right away, but because I finally knew the truth. She wasn't going to stop until I disappeared. From Nathan's world, from Frank's protection, from the family photo albums altogether. And if she was writing the story, I needed to hold on to the pen. I wish I could say that was the first time Elaine tried to erase me. But no. That toast, the one about knowing your place, was just her most theatrical effort. She didn't need to spike my drink to wound me. Her sharpest weapons had always been delivered in porcelain tones, wrapped in lace and pearls. Still, that night was different. Not just because of the drug, but because of the way she stopped pretending I didn't know. She wanted me to feel it now. The shift. The ending. The moment she believed she'd finally gotten rid of me. After I drank, she watched me like a scientist watches a test subject. Every tilt of her head, every twitch of her eye, was a silent countdown to the moment I'd falter. But I didn't. Not in the way she hoped. Instead, I sat still, breathing carefully, smiling politely, refusing to crumble on cue. People think cruelty always announces itself. Shouts in public, breaks glass, slams doors. But no, the worst kind whispers in your ear while smiling at your child. It folds your name out of the family holiday card and calls it a printing error. It asks if you're eating enough while scooping you the smallest slice of cake. That was Elaine. She didn't slap, she suffocated. And that night, she wanted to bury me in silk napkins and Chardonnay. The guests clinked their glasses again as the servers brought out dessert. Chocolate mousse towers with edible gold flakes. Of course, her favorite. Never mind that I was allergic to hazelnut. She forgot. Again. I reached for a glass of water. My hand trembled slightly, whether from adrenaline or the alcohol, I couldn't tell. But Elaine noticed, her eyes narrowed, just a flash. Then she leaned in toward Frank and whispered something, her mouth almost pressed to his ear. He didn't smile, he didn't respond. He just looked at me, and for the first time in 15 years there was pity in his face. Frank wasn't a confrontational man. He avoided drama like spoiled fish, but he wasn't blind. He'd seen how Elaine froze me out, how Nathan drifted farther from me each year he spent tangled in her orbit. And now, maybe he was finally seeing enough. Nathan, meanwhile, stayed in his seat, phone face down on the table like a peace offering. He hadn't noticed the way his mother had seated us apart, again. Or maybe he had, and just didn't care. I used to think he didn't see it. That if I just explained better, if I cried a little less and smiled a little more, he'd hear me. But that's the lie people like Elaine teach women like me. That if you're suffering silently, you must be noble. That silence is power. That strength looks like patience. And the more invisible you become, the more love you'll earn. But sitting there, watching her bask in the applause of a crowd that would never know what she'd tried to do to me, I finally understood something else. Silence isn't power, it's protection. For them, not for us. When Elaine excused herself to check on the caterers, I followed her with my eyes. She didn't go to the kitchen. She went to the side corridor near the restrooms, where the walls were thinner and the sound didn't carry so well. She was on her phone, whispering, laughing. I'd heard that laugh before, once when I'd miscarried and she told Nathan, well, maybe it's nature's way of saying you two aren't ready. Once when I bought my first solo car and she smirked, that's brave, buying without asking your husband first. And now that same laugh, hidden behind walls. Planning something else, probably. Always something else. I turned back toward the party. My reflection caught in one of the tall windows, shimmering in candlelight. For a second, I almost didn't recognize myself. The woman standing there wasn't broken. She wasn't small. She wasn't begging to belong. She looked steady. And suddenly, it hit me. I didn't want a place at Elaine's table anymore. I didn't want her approval. I didn't want her version of family, her rules, her hierarchy. I just wanted out. Out from the manipulation. Out from the tightrope walk. Out from the game she thought she was winning. She had no idea I was already holding the match, and the fuel and everything she'd ever poured on me was just waiting to burn. It started with Frank clearing his throat. Not loudly, not rudely, just enough to quiet the room by accident. Elaine had just raised her fork, ready to dive into her second slice of cake. Her lipstick was perfect, her posture flawless. If you'd seen her that moment, you'd think she was untouchable. But then Frank stood up, and everything slowed. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, like he was trying to find something past the chandeliers and champagne. I wasn't going to say anything, he said, voice soft. But I can't sit through this one. Elaine blinked. Darling, what are you? He held up his hand. Not to silence her, not rudely, just gently, like a man who spent too many years in rooms like this one, staying quiet for the sake of peace. There's something I need to say, he continued, to everyone here, about tonight, about my wife. People shifted. Forks paused. Someone laughed nervously, expecting a joke. Frank didn't smile. His eyes landed on me, and only then did my breath catch. Because I knew from the way his jaw was set, from the way his shoulders didn't flinch under Elaine's stare. He was about to do what no one had ever done in that family. He was about to choose me. Elaine's laugh came out tight. Frank, please, this is not the time. She drugged her. The words landed like a dropped glass. No one moved. Frank's voice didn't shake. My wife tried to poison my daughter-in-law tonight. I saw her do it. Gasps. Real ones this time. Elaine froze. Her fork still midair, her hand trembling now just slightly. I watched her pour something into the glass, Frank said. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it was some supplement. Or some ridiculous old wives thing. He looked down, but then I saw the look on her face. When she handed over the glass, I've known that look for 40 years. That's not concern, that's calculation. Elaine stood slowly. You're not well, Frank. But no one was listening to her anymore, and I still hadn't said a word, because I didn't need to. Not yet, because this was just the beginning. Elaine didn't sit down, she didn't scream or plead. She stood there, spine straight, face unreadable, like a statue no one dared chisel into yet. "I didn't," she began, but her voice cracked, and that was enough. Frank didn't even look at her. Frank sat down. Slowly. Like the truth had drained the last bit of strength from his spine. And in that pause, long and thick with shock, I stood. Not because he asked me to, but because I had something he didn't know I had. I pulled a small envelope from my clutch. There wasn't a podium. There wasn't music. But somehow the room hushed anyway. Not dramatic. Just simple. "This," I said, "is a recording of a phone call made last Tuesday." Elaine's chin lifted slightly, but her eyes flinched. "It was made on a disposable phone," I continued, using a voice modulator to hide the speaker's identity. "The call was placed to a private compound pharmacy in Birmingham. The person on the other end requested a custom tincture, non-detectable in alcohol, designed to cause fainting, disorientation, and confusion. Temporary. Non-lethal. But specific." I paused. In that call, the speaker identifies herself as Mrs. Frank Ellsworth. Someone gasped, but I wasn't done. I turned to the back of the room. "Mr. Maddox?" A man in a dark green blazer stepped forward, late 50s, quiet eyes. "The pharmacist who filled the request," I said softly. "He's here tonight at my invitation." Elaine staggered one step back. Mr. Maddox didn't say much. He didn't need to. He nodded once, then opened a manila folder and passed it to Frank. Inside, the invoice, the order sheet, a screenshot of the text confirmation, time-stamped and signed. The silence in the room turned sharp. No one dared blink. Elaine's lips moved, but no sound came out. Nathan stood now, slowly, reluctantly. "Mom," he said. Just that. One word. But it shook. She looked at him like she didn't recognize his face. "Why?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Why would you?" And that's when I spoke. For the first time that night, loud enough for everyone to hear. She didn't want to kill me. She wanted to embarrass me, to make me faint, to ruin the night, to make sure the only thing anyone remembered was how I couldn't handle my drink. I looked her straight in the eye. But she forgot something. The room waited. She forgot that I stopped playing nice the moment she put a target on my back. Elaine didn't cry. She didn't fall to her knees. She simply turned, to Frank, to Nathan, to the crowd, searching for someone who might still defend her. But there were no allies left. Just faces. Just silence. Just truth. And finally she sat down. Not because anyone asked her to, but because there was nothing left to say. The room didn't erupt. It deflated. No screaming. No outrage. Just that awful, echoing kind of silence. The kind that follows a church bell after a funeral. One by one, the guests started setting down their forks, their napkins, their champagne flutes. Elaine sat back in her chair like someone had cut her strings. Even the piano player stopped. Frank didn't speak again. He just stood there, quietly looking out at a room he'd helped build, full of people who'd sent birthday cards and casseroles and Christmas invites. People who used to adore Elaine. People who now looked unsure. But not because they needed more proof. They just didn't know how to look at her anymore. Nathan was the first to move. He stepped back from the table, jaw clenched, then turned without a word and walked out. No one stopped him. Elaine's sister tried to say something. Some shaky defense, some plea for grace, but her voice cracked before it could even land. I didn't gloat, I didn't cry, I didn't leave, I just stayed. Because I wanted to see what it looked like when a legacy cracked in half. When the woman who spent decades building an image of control and poise and southern perfection finally ran out of mirrors to polish. Elaine reached for her glass, but this time, no one raised theirs with her. The toast was over. So was the mask. And the room had already chosen. The next morning, Elaine's picture was nowhere to be found on the country club's social board. Someone had taken it down before breakfast. By noon, the head of the garden committee had sent out a resignation announcement on Elaine's behalf. By dinner, her calendar of lunch dates was empty. People didn't confront her. They just quietly closed their doors. She called Nathan twice that week. He let it go to voicemail both times. I heard the messages. The first one was brittle. The second, desperate. She didn't know how to apologize. Not really, because apologies weren't part of her toolkit. What she knew was how to reframe, redirect, pretend it wasn't what it was. But not this time. Frank moved into the guest room. He didn't make a scene, didn't pack in anger. He just stopped sleeping beside her. Then he stopped eating dinner with her. Then, talking. I visited once after the party at Frank's request. Elaine didn't come out of the den. I saw her silhouette behind the sheer curtains, motionless, like she was hoping I'd just disappear. Frank walked me to the door afterward. He didn't say thank you, he didn't have to. His eyes said enough. You didn't deserve it, he finally murmured, voice low. Any of it. I nodded. Neither did Nathan. Frank's face broke then, just slightly. He sees it now, he said. Took him too long, but he sees it. And maybe that was the greatest justice of all. Not the silence, not the social exile, but the fact that the one thing Elaine prized most, control, was gone. No one yelled. No one punished her. No one banned her from the house or the holidays. They just stopped giving her power. And when you've built your whole life on pulling strings, there's nothing more terrifying than the moment no one moves. The morning after the anniversary, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes after a storm, when even the walls are too stunned to echo. I stood in my kitchen, barefoot, holding a chipped mug of coffee I didn't remember making. The sun was just starting to come through the window above the sink, landing soft on the countertop. Dust danced in the air like it hadn't been told about last night. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything, really. Just still. And maybe that was enough. Nathan had stayed silent most of the night. He didn't follow me home. He didn't call. But around 6 a.m. I heard the front door unlock. No grand apology. No defense, just the sound of a suitcase dragging gently across the hardwood and the soft click of the guest room door. And you know what? That was fine. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for him. Not for her. Not for anyone to tell me I'd done enough or that I'd finally earned a seat at their precious table. I didn't want their table anymore. The old me would have rushed to make eggs, to smooth over the tension, to ask if he'd slept okay. But I just sipped my coffee, stared out at the garden I'd spent 3 summers pulling weeds from, and let myself exist. There was no plan, no 5-year roadmap, just a small, quiet knowledge that I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of her. Not of being alone. Not even of starting from scratch, because the worst had happened. She had tried to poison me, literally and metaphorically, and I'd survived it. And now I got to decide what kind of life came next. I glanced at my phone. A message blinked from Frank. Just one sentence. Proud of how you held your ground. Let me know when you're ready to talk. I smiled. Not because I needed his approval, but because maybe, for the first time, someone saw me. Not as an accessory. Not as the nuisance daughter-in-law. Just me. I didn't respond to Frank right away. I let the message sit there for a few hours, like a flower left on a porch, unexpected, simple, kind. Instead, I spent the rest of the morning doing something I had done in years. I opened the shed. It still smelled like rain and rust. Old terracotta pots were stacked in the corner, along with the little bench I'd once used for potting herbs when we first moved in. Before I let that part of myself go quiet. Before I'd started shrinking around Elaine, reshaping myself into whatever wouldn't trigger her scorn. I pulled the bench out into the sunlight and sat down with a bag of potting soil and 3 small planters I found tucked behind the mower. And for no other reason than it felt right, I planted something. Nothing fancy, just basil, thyme, and a single tomato vine. But as I pushed my hands into the soil, I realized I was finally touching something real again. Something that didn't ask me to apologize for existing. Something that didn't demand I prove my worth every time I showed up. Just dirt, seeds, sunlight, and the patience to see what grows. That afternoon, Chloe came by with her mom, my sister-in-law. No one said the word Elaine. No one had to. It hung in the air like wallpaper no one could stand to look at anymore. Chloe ran to the garden, crouched next to my new planter, and said, "Are these for me?" I nodded. "If you help me water them." She smiled wide and gap-toothed. "Deal." That was all I needed. No grand reconciliation, no fairy tale ending, just a moment of peace, a space that belonged to me. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not revenge, not applause, not even forgiveness from people who never earned it. Just freedom. Freedom to rest, to choose, to bloom again in your own time. To those of you who've been told to stay quiet, to endure, to play nice while others step over your kindness, this story is for you. You don't have to drink what they serve. You get to build your own table. And if that table seats just one for now, that's more than enough. If you've ever had to rebuild from betrayal, quietly, fiercely, drop a comment below. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You matter more than they ever let you believe. Subscribe for more stories that remind you you're not alone, and you are never powerless.